If we go back 60 years, at 23, your grandmother was probably already married. She would have already moved out of her parents' house, held down a full-time job with a pension attached to it, and had a driver license she would have had for a couple of years. But none of that made her exceptional. That was just what the average 23-year-old looked like for almost everyone in her generation. At 23 today, the picture looks nothing like that. The average age of first marriage has climbed by roughly 7 years since the 1970s. A growing share of 23-year-olds are still living with a parent, not because they're lazy, but because the math on moving out alone doesn't add up, and many haven't finished paying for the degree they were told they needed just to be considered for the job that was supposed to make all of this possible in the first place. Today we look back at the quite structural reasons why an entire generation is unable to achieve the same milestone their grandparents hit by 23, and those milestones aren't just late, they're not coming at all. And once you understand why, you start to understand why so many people your age have stopped even aiming for that old checklist altogether. Let's dive into the first chapter, the ladder with no rungs. Here's a phrase that would have made no sense to your grandfather. Entry-level job with 5 years of experience required. This is a weird contradiction, and yet it's become so common in modern hiring that multiple labor market studies have documented it directly. A large share of postings labeled entry-level now lists years of prior experience as a requirement, sometimes 2, sometimes 5, and sometimes even more. The bottom rung of the ladder, the one that's supposed to exist specifically so people with no experience can get some, has been quietly removed from a huge number of ladders across the entire economy. Part of this comes from a shift most companies won't say out loud: internships. What used to be a summer of coffee fetching is now, in entire industries, treated as the real first rung. An unpaid or barely paid tryout, you're expected to survive before anyone will consider you for the paid job. Multiple surveys of the internship economy have found that the majority of internships in some of these fields still pay nothing at all, which quietly filters an entire generation's early career opportunities by who can afford to work for free. And then there's the automation layer sitting underneath all of it. A wave of entry-level junior and support tier roles, the exact roles that used to train new graduates, are the same roles most exposed to AI tools that can now draft, summarize, code and answer customer questions faster than a first-year employee can. Multiple labor economists have flagged this specific pattern. It isn't senior roles disappearing first, it's the bottom rung, the training rung, the one an entire generation was counting on to get a foothold in the first place. If we put it all together, we get a completely new problem. One your parents mostly didn't face at your age, not unemployment exactly, but a shrinking on-ramp. The jobs at the top of most fields still exist. It's the door at the bottom that's getting narrower year over year, right as an entire generation is trying to walk through it at once. And there's a specific, almost cruel irony sitting inside that shrinking on-ramp. It disproportionately punishes exactly the people who followed the old advice most closely. Go to college and the door will open. But the door that used to open for a diploma alone now increasingly opens only for a diploma plus a portfolio of unpaid experience most families can't afford to subsidize. Which means the do everything right path and the have the financial cushion to survive an unpaid internship year path have quietly merged into a single requirement, whether anyone intended that outcome or not. The credential inflation machine. Somewhere along the way, a 4-year degree quietly became the minimum price of admission for jobs that never used to require one at all. Look at job postings for roles like administrative coordinator, retail store manager, entry-level sales, or basic office administration. These positions that 30 years ago were routinely filled by capable people with a high school diploma and some on-the-job training. Labor market researchers have a name for what happened to those same job categories over the last 2 decades: degree inflation. The tasks in the job barely changed, but the piece of paper required to be considered for it did change. This matters because it doesn't just cost time, it also costs opportunity for an enormous share of the workforce. Roughly 2 out of every 3 working-age Americans do not hold a 4-year degree. When degree requirements creep into jobs that never really needed one, you're not raising the bar on skill, you're quietly locking a majority of the available workforce out of a growing share of decent, stable jobs based on a credential that has nothing to do with whether they can actually do the work or not. And here's the part that makes it feel like a trap rather than just a hurdle. The credential itself has been getting less exclusive at exactly the same time it's been getting more mandatory. More people hold bachelor's degree today than at any point in American history, which means The degree that was supposed to set you apart from the competition is now almost mandatory just to be in the room. You're required to have something that used to guarantee an advantage, except now everyone applying next to you has it too. The requirement went up. The advantage it used to buy quietly went down. Some employers have started publicly walking this back, dropping degree requirements for selected roles in an effort to widen their applicant pool. It's a promising signal, but it's happening at a small enough scale in a small enough number of companies that it hasn't meaningfully changed the picture for most job seekers yet. For the majority of the job market, the credential machine keeps running exactly the way it has for the last 2 decades. More required and less guaranteed in return. The delayed adulthood. Adulthood, as a set of concrete milestones, now arrives much later than it did 2 generations ago. The median age of first marriage in the United States has climbed from the early 20s in 1970 to closer to 30 today. This is one of the largest shifts of its kind ever recorded in a single lifetime. Some of that shift reflects genuine choice. People marrying later because they want to, not because they have to, but a significant share of it, according to researchers who study the trend, tracks directly with financial precarity. People delaying marriage specifically because they don't feel financially stable enough yet to combine a household with someone else. Moving Out tells a similar story. A larger share of young adults now lives with a parent than at almost any point since the Great Depression. That's not one bad year distorting the average, that's a sustained multi-year pattern of an entire generation staying home longer, not because independence lost its appeal, but because independence got more expensive faster than paychecks did. These 2 milestones, 2 very different traditions. One is romantic and the other is practical, both delayed by roughly the same stretch of years, on roughly the same timeline for a lot of the same underlying financial reasons. Adulthood didn't disappear, it just got pushed back on a clock nobody consented to. Even the milestones that do happen on schedule often happen in a quieter, smaller form than they used to. First cars purchased later and more often used rather than new, first apartments shared with more roommates and for longer than the 1 or 2 roommate norm of a generation ago. None of these are dramatic on their own, but stacked together across an entire generation at the same time, they describe something bigger than any single delayed milestone. An entire life stage that used to run on a roughly predictable clock now runs structurally several years behind where it used to. The trust collapse. Ask an entire generation to build a future, and at some point you're also asking them to trust the institutions that future depends on. That trust has been quietly falling apart for decades. Gallup has tracked American confidence in major institutions for over 50 years, and the pattern across almost every one of them points in the same direction. Confidence in Congress is down to single digits in some recent years, which means roughly 9 out of 10 Americans say they have little or no confidence in the body that writes the laws. Confidence in organized religion is down by roughly half since the 1970s. Confidence in the media is near record lows across outlets across the political spectrum, and the confidence in big business is consistently among the lowest rated institutions tracked in the entire survey. This confidence has fallen across nearly every major institution among people who disagree about almost everything else. What's left for a lot of young people is a strange kind of vacuum, a sense that the major systems that are supposed to represent your interests, inform you honestly, or look out for your well-being mostly don't do that. It's hard to overstate how much that shapes decision making downstream. If you don't trust the institution that are supposed to catch you, a functioning safety net, honest information, employers who will invest in you long term, you start to plan differently. You save differently, you commit to less, and you're being more cautious. Not because you're cynical for its own sake, but because the data on trust gives you very little reason not to be. There's one institution that bucks the trend worth naming directly, because it says something about what actually rebuilds confidence. Small business and in some tracking, the military. Both consistently rate higher in public trust than almost every other major institution measured. The common thread researchers point to isn't scale or prestige, it's proximity and visible accountability. People trust what they can see working, close up, with consequences attached when it doesn't. Distant, unaccountable, and headline-driven institutions lost trust the fastest, and the ones that stay close to the people they serve mostly held on to it. The side hustle economy. Ask someone your age what they do for a living, and increasingly the answer requires a list and not a job title. Multiple recent labor surveys have found that a large and growing share of working adults under 30 report earning income from more than one source: a primary job plus freelance work, driving, selling, tutoring, content creation, or some combination of several at once. This isn't the same thing as ambition or hustle culture as a personality trait. For a meaningful share of that group, it's described in the same surveys as a necessity, not a preference. The primary job alone doesn't cover the bills, so a second and sometimes third income stream fills the gap. The gig economy specifically has grown dramatically over the past decade, and it has a specific trade-off attached to it that rarely makes it into the marketing: flexibility. In exchange for almost none of the structural benefits a traditional job used to guarantee, no employer-sponsored healthcare, no retirement matching, no paid leave, no guaranteed hours, and multiple independent contractors report income that varies significantly week to week, with none of the predictability that made it possible for earlier generations to plan a mortgage, a family, or a retirement around a single stable paycheck. What you end up with is a labor market where an entire generation is working more total hours across more total jobs than a lot of their parents ever did at the same age, while receiving fewer of the guarantees that used to come bundled with full-time work. More hustle and less floor underneath it. And there's also a branding problem hiding inside this chapter too. Multiple income streams get marketed constantly as empowerment. Be your own boss, diversify your income, build your personal brand. Some of that framing is genuine and some people do thrive inside it, but surveyed honestly, a large share of people stacking 3 income sources at once describe the motivation not as ambition but as arithmetic. None of the 3 on their own cover rent. The hustle culture, branding, and the necessity-driven reality are, for a meaningful share of this generation, describing the exact same set of exhausting hours from 2 very different angles. The Friendship Recession. This chapter isn't about how much time you spend on a screen. It's about something researchers only started tracking carefully once the numbers got hard to ignore: how many close friends people your age actually have left. The American Survey Center has tracked close friendship counts across decades, and the drop is steep. In the late 1980s, the share of Americans reporting 0 close friends was in the low single digits. In the most recent tracking, that number has climbed several times over. A meaningful share of adults, disproportionately young adults, now reporting having 0 close friends. Dating tells a related but separate story. A majority of single adults under 30 who have used dating apps describe the experience in surveys using words like exhausting, discouraging, or unsuccessful more often than positive or hopeful. Multiple researchers have described a specific mismatch. Technology promised more romantic and social options than any generation in history has ever had access to, and the results were a documented rise in reported loneliness and dating fatigue that runs in almost the opposite direction of what should have happened. And now let's put the two together: fewer close friends and harder dating, and you get something that doesn't show up on a balance sheet but shapes everything else in this episode. Financial stress is easier to carry with people around you. Career setbacks sting less with a close friend to talk them through. A generation with a shrinking friend network is carrying every other pressure in this episode with less of a support structure underneath it than the generations before them had. Part of what makes this particular decline hard to see from the inside is that it doesn't look like isolation in the traditional sense. Group chats stay active, feeds stay full of other people's lives. The volume of low effort contact is arguably higher than it's ever been. What's shrunk specifically is the small high effort category researchers define as close friendships. The people you would call at 2 in the morning, not the people who would like your post the next day. It's possible and increasingly common to be in constant low grade contact with dozens of people and still land in the growing share who report having no one in that second harder category at all. The robot downstairs. There's a genuinely new fear sitting underneath a lot of Gen Z career anxiety that older generations simply never had to plan around at the same age. The entry-level job itself might not exist by the time you're ready for the next one. Multiple labor economists studying the current wave of AI tools have converged on a similar warning. The jobs most exposed to near-term automation cluster heavily in exactly the tasks junior employees are usually hired to do: drafting, summarizing, basic coding, first pass customer support, scheduling, routine analysis. Not because junior junior employees are replaceable as people, but because those specific tasks are structurally the easiest for current AI tools to approximate. That creates a strange, unprecedented kind of pressure. Previous generations worried about automation eventually coming for their industry later in their career. A meaningful share of Gen Z workers are entering the workforce worried it's already arrived, at the exact rung they're standing on, before they have even had the chance to climb past it. Surveys of young workers on this specific question consistently find a majority expressing real concern that AI will affect their job or career path within the next few years. This connects directly back to chapter 1, the vanishing bottom rung. It isn't just that entry-level jobs are asking for experience nobody starting out could have, it's that the same roles are now also the ones most exposed to being automated out of the hiring plan altogether. Two separate pressures compounding on the exact same rung of the exact same ladder. It's worth being precise about what this fear is and isn't. It isn't a claim that every entry-level job disappears overnight, and it isn't a claim that technology is universally destructive. What multiple labor economists actually describe is narrower and, for someone at the start of a career, arguably just as unsettling. A compression of the tasks a junior employee is hired to learn on, which historically is exactly how junior employees became senior ones. If the training tasks get automated away before a new graduate has had the chance to practice them, the traditional path from junior to senior gets thinner too, and not eliminated but narrower, at precisely the moment an entire generation is trying to walk through it. Somewhere it's working differently. None of this is some unchangeable law of modern economies. A handful of countries have built specific systems that hand young people a clearer, less chaotic transition into adulthood, and it's worth looking at what those systems actually do differently. For example, Switzerland runs one of the most developed apprenticeship systems in the world. Roughly 2/3 of Swiss teenagers enter a structured paid apprenticeship that combines real workplace experience with formal education rather than a 4-year theoretical degree with no guaranteed employer at the end of it. Youth unemployment in Switzerland has consistently ranked among the lowest of any wealthy nation year after year, largely credited to this exact pipeline, a direct funded bridge between still a student and employed adult, instead of leaving each individual 22-year-old to build that bridge alone. The Netherlands separately has built one of the strongest part-time and flexible work protections in Europe, meaning young workers piecing together multiple income sources still receive many of the same legal protections and benefits full-time workers get, a direct contrast with the largely unprotected gig work covered a few chapters ago. Neither country eliminated economic pressure on its young people entirely, but both built specific funded structural bridges instead of leaving young adults to improvise a transition to adulthood entirely on their own, the way the American system currently does. All this means the specific shape of this chapter, the missing rungs, the credential trap, the unprotected gig work, isn't an unavoidable feature of modern economy. It's a specific documented set of policy choices made and not made by people who are not the 20-somethings currently living with the consequences of them. Japan offers a different but related lesson, this time as a cautionary tale rather than a model. Its Shushoku Katsudo system, a rigid once-a-year hiring cycle timed to graduation, long guaranteed nearly every new graduate a job offer before they even finished school. It solved the on-ramp problem almost entirely for decades, but it did so by locking an entire cohort's career trajectory to a single, narrow hiring window, with brutal, long-lasting consequences for anyone who graduated during a recession year and missed it. The lesson isn't that any one system is perfect, it's that every country makes an active choice about how much structure to build around the transition into adulthood, and the American choice largely has been to build very little and let each individual young adult improvise their own bridge instead, the part no survey captures. None of the numbers in this video are new to you, even if the specific figures were. You didn't need a Gallup poll to tell you trust feels different now, or a labor study to tell you the first job was harder to land than it was supposed to be. What the data mostly does is confirm something you already suspected and couldn't always prove, that this isn't a personal failure to launch, it's a generation trying to climb a ladder that quietly lost several of its bottom rungs, holding a credential that quietly lost some of its value, leaning on friendships that quietly got thinner, while trusting institutions that quietly gave them less and less reason to. You didn't misread the room actually changed. The schedule nobody agreed to. Your grandparents hit their milestones on a schedule the whole country more or less agreed to together. Married young, moved out young, One job, one ladder, one set of institutions everyone more or less trusted to hold up their end of it. You inherited a version of that same schedule with half of its rungs missing, its trust mostly spent, and a brand new kind of competition. Artificial, tireless, and just getting started. Standing at the exact rung you were supposed to start climbing from. None of that means the ladder is gone for good. It means the old one doesn't reach anymore, and somebody is going to have to build the next few rungs themselves. The data in this video isn't the end of that story. It's just finally an honest description of where the ladder actually stops, so that whatever gets built next gets built by people who know exactly how high they're really starting from. One ladder and a generation standing at the bottom of it with a clearer read on the gap than anyone who built the thing ever bothered to give them. That clarity is not nothing. Every previous generation that eventually fixed a broken system first had to see it clearly before they could start rebuilding it. This video was the seeing part. What gets built next is still entirely an open question, and it's one this generation alone gets to answer.